Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by oldschoollane.blogspot.com and is associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, The Comic Book Cast, and The Arun Mehta Show.
No other night. Tonight. No other place. Here. No way to stop it. SNICK.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome.
You are now sneaking. You are now sneaking. You are now sneaking.
Hello everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia, and I am back with the guys behind You Scared of This, the podcast that talked about every single episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark. I am back with David and Eli. Welcome back, guys.
Hey, thanks.
Hello, Patricia. Thanks for having us back on the show.
Absolutely. So, today we're going to be discussing about the Saturday night Nickelodeon program's SNICK in honor of its 26th anniversary. Now, technically, we did do a podcast like this a whole year ago to celebrate the 25th anniversary, but unfortunately, due to technical issues, mostly on my part, the whole thing was completely lost, and we're hoping to try to redeem ourselves with doing a similar podcast that we did the first time, although now we're better prepared. At least I'm better prepared this time.
I can't believe it's been a full year.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
We have been in your situation before. We talked on our show about how infamously we talked to DJ McHale, the creator of Are You Afraid of the Dark, friend of your show as well. We talked to him twice. The first time we lost the entire interview. We had to talk to him a second time much later. And he was nice enough to tell us that he had completely forgotten the first interview, so it was like talking to him the first time all over again. I'm treating this sort of the same way.
That's okay. Well, at least I know for sure that I'm not making a complete fool of myself. So... All right, so for those who are too young enough to remember, back in the early 90s, around Saturday night, Nickelodeon used to air late-night programs, specifically for the lineup, consisting of maybe 4 or 5 different TV shows. The original ones were Clarissa Explains It All, there were Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Never heard of it.
Yeah, what? Are you foo-hoo? They were the Ren and Stimpy show, and there was Roundhouse. So, we're going to be discussing about the whole lineup of SNICK, from the original run all the way up to the revival run, and find out, the best and the worst shows that aired from that lineup. So, I guess because you guys have talked to death about Are You Afraid of the Dark, and you guys who are listening can go listen to You Scared of This, so we're just going to skip Are You Afraid of the Dark. We're not going to really talk much into it, so I guess we can talk about the other shows that aired during the early lineup, which the first one we're going to be talking about is Clarissa Explains It All.
Let's talk about Clarissa Explains It All.
Now, it's hard to believe that 3 years ago, I did Clarissa Month in honor of the show's 25th anniversary. And I had Mitchell Kriegman, the creator of Clarissa, over on my podcast. And I discussed about Clarissa Explains It All alongside with my co-host, Christina. And I discussed about the Clarissa Now pilot and the recent book, Things I Can't Explain. Since then, there has been an announcement that there's going to be a Clarissa Explains It All reboot that's going to be coming out.
They're bringing back everything. Nickelodeon, I can't think of a single classic Nickelodeon show that hasn't been at least considered or optioned for a revival in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yes, I cannot wait to see Space Cases rebooted.
We'll talk about that later, but I would watch that.
We'll talk about that, don't you worry. Alright, so, Clarissa, yes. So Clarissa Explains It All is about a teenage girl named Clarissa, and she's going through her everyday life discussing about various teenage topics. Boys, music, her annoying parents, school, getting a driver's license, so on and so forth. She has an annoying brother named Ferguson. She has goofy parents consisting of her dad, who's an architect, her mom, who works at a museum, and she cooks a lot of quote-unquote healthy organic tofu dishes. And she has her best friend Sam, who never uses the front door and always climbs with a ladder up her window. So I'd like to, now I've already stated my thoughts on Clarissa, but I'll just reiterate for those who didn't tune into Clarissa Month the first time. I understand that the show on the surface is completely outdated by today's standards. The clothes and the type of music, the computer games she used to play, I get it. But there's something about Clarissa Explains It All that while it does, showcase a lot on the time period that it took place in, there's something you can gravitate towards. There's something relatable about Clarissa. She seemed like the cool person that we always looked up to. And she was like a role model for a lot of girls and teenagers. And I think that aspect is what makes it still remembered to this day. And I'm actually really curious about how they're going to do that in the reboot.
I think Clarissa has aged like gold. It's so dated that it's finally come back around and become like contemporary again.
Yeah, in the way that like Saved by the Bell, aside from the episodes that are not at all woke, is sort of like a nostalgia trip and ironically enjoyable for a lot of younger people. I think that Clarissa probably scratches that same itch. It is very, very distinctly of its era, which is like visually and culturally, but like you said, Patricia, it also kind of hits on things that are more universal about family and friends and being a teenager and growing up. So I think that it probably has more appeal than some of the shows that we're going to be talking about. I would bet that it has aged better than quite a few of them.
Eli, what are your memories of watching Clarissa? I'm curious to hear your take on it.
I remember Clarissa maybe as well or better than I remember Are You Afraid of the Dark, which is very weird. And I don't know why. Maybe it's because I allowed myself to watch more Clarissa because it was less scary, obviously. But also, as a child, I was incredibly impressionable, and I basically, any show that tried to define what my experiences were for me, any show that was like, here's what it's like to be a kid, or here's what parents are like, or teenagers are like, I was just like, yep, it must be true, it's on television. Like, I was young enough when SNICK came out that anything Clarissa said, I was like, this is just 100% the Bible. Like, this is accurate for me. And so I really ate it up, which is probably why I hated Are You Afraid of the Dark, but for the same reason, because I was like, oh shit, all of these things are real.
I remember seeing it as a kid on occasion. Like, I was a little young when Clarissa first premiered in, I guess that would have been 92. Anytime I did see it, though, it was like a window into another world. It was exploring, like, stuff that I had no concept of as a shitty little kid. What it was like to be a teenager, what it was like to be a teenage girl. And it was always very, like, eye-opening and, like, scary is not the word, but, like, exciting to see this, like, to see a show told from the perspective of someone like that I could not imagine like putting myself in their shoes. And yeah, like the fact that it was this like sugar rush manic, early 90s sort of trip made it really compelling. Like I remember seeing it. Anytime I did see it, I was always sort of hooked by it when I did see it.
And it was a good show too. Like not every show that came out on SNICK was good. How many years did Roundhouse last?
It lasted for about like 3 years, and then when all that aired, it pretty much just took over in terms of, okay, this is going to be like the next generation, you can't do that on television. Sorry, Roundhouse fans, that's personally how I feel about the show.
I don't think Roundhouse is going to be revived anytime soon. I think it's the one show that's exempt from getting a revival.
Yeah, there's not enough... I don't think there's enough documentation of it in the world for people to have nostalgia for it, so I think we're fine there. But yeah, like Clarissa is a show that people still remember and still talk about and think about, and so I think that it was... I think that speaks to its quality more than really anything else. It made a star out of its star, and she guest starred on our show, on Are You Afraid of the Dark, so, like, that's a big deal. Clarissa was very clearly like a huge success at its time, and it's not surprising. Everything on it I thought was really good. I would love to go back and watch it and see how well it holds up. I'm probably not going to after the exhaustion that we just went through, but I bet it holds up very, very well.
Well, aesthetically, if, going for the whole ironic 90s thing, like they say, what's old is new again. I'm not even joking when I say this, but I'm going to be signing up for classes again, and I'm not even joking. One of the things that they were giving away to college students are fanny packs, and they were excited about it.
That doesn't surprise me in the least.
I see people wearing really, really tiny backpacks, and I'm just like, oh, we're back where we were. My parents were right. It really does happen this way.
Yeah, I saw a girl wearing like a denim jean jacket, and there was a girl who had like this really thick scrunchie on her ponytail. So it's just crazy to me. It's like, yep, the 90s are back.
Now is the time for the Clarissa reboot.
Yes, absolutely. Which I'm actually curious about the Clarissa reboot, not due to the fact that who are they going to cast? Is Melissa Joan Hart going to be back? I'm not curious. I'm not concerned about that. I'm sure some of you guys know, if you guys watched my podcast or listened to my podcast on Things I Can't Explain, which was the book that Mitchell Kriegman wrote, which he said was a continuation of Clarissa. This was during the time in which when Clarissa was 26 years old and she was living in New York City as a journalist. I'm actually curious, is that going to be a continuation off of the book, or is it going to ignore the book, and is it going to continue right where the series left off, in which when Clarissa is going to be going over to college in New York City where she's going to become a journalist?
I wonder if this is going to even continue the story of Melissa Joan Hart's character. Do you think they'll continue that legacy, or are they just going to cast a completely new actress in the role of a new Clarissa for a new age and just ignore any previous continuity?
Which would be more interesting, if this was a sequel series a la Girl Meets World, or if this was a reboot, or if this is set in the same universe but is an entirely different Clarissa who is not related to Melissa Joan Hart's Clarissa.
Ooh, that's a good one there. I never considered that. A Clarissa who is not Clarissa Darling, but maybe a completely different Clarissa. I haven't thought of that. It could be one or the other. I mean, especially nowadays with Fuller House and Girl Meets World and the Raven TV series, in which it's like a sequel series in which they're focusing on their kids. But yeah, it could be a possibility that it might be a reboot series in which Clarissa, maybe she's a teenager going through life in 2018 and she's talking about cell phones and social media, and her mom, maybe she's gonna, instead of cooking tofu, which, we've come so far in cooking, tofu dishes nowadays. If you guys remember back in the day when she made those tofu sundaes and the tofu casseroles, we've gone past that.
Thankfully.
Yeah, thankfully. Seriously, I did an entire cooking video about good ways to cook tofu. I think nowadays, because I follow food trends, I think that it wouldn't be surprising if maybe Clarissa's mom was in maybe a paleo diet or low carb, high protein, or gluten free or anything like that. One of the things that I think I remember talking about a long time ago when I did my top 10 Nickelodeon shows that need to be remade, and I mentioned Clarissa, was that what if her mom cooked foreign foods? Because she worked in a museum and she was surrounded by different cultures, what if she liked to cook on those different cultures? What if she liked to cook Indian food and Italian food and maybe Japanese food? And then Clarissa's like, oh, but Mom, why can't you just cook meatloaf and mashed potatoes like a normal mom or something?
Maybe she's very into HelloFresh style meals delivered to the home, all organically sourced and ethically raised.
Yes.
If they're going to try and mirror the old series, I think the idea of having her, because part of the point of that was they were making fun of parents and making fun of the things that parents, and showing kids hey, your parents do stuff that is laughable. It's okay to laugh at your parents. And so I think her following a new food trend every episode would probably be the safest way to go there, just to show that because that wasn't something I don't think that happened when we were kids. I don't think my parents, were given over to trends, and I don't think parents in general were people who like picked up on fads in the same way. I think fads were maybe something that was more just sort of attributed to youth culture when we were kids, but now because of the internet, like everything can change for everyone much more quickly. Like you don't have to be just tapped into the absolute newest stuff because you're a teen. You can do it just because you're a living human being. And so it seems like that would be the way to go, is have her do, like you said, meal delivery stuff and weird diets and all sorts of stupid stuff like that.
Yeah, definitely. If they are going to do a sequel series of Clarissa, in which maybe not only will they be following the series, but maybe they'll follow the book, then some fans are going to be really disappointed to know. And spoilers, severe spoilers if you have not listened to my podcast on things I can't explain, but Clarissa and Sam do not end up together.
No! Horror of horrors!
I'm very sorry, they do not. Although there is an interesting chapter in the book in which what happened, like they tried doing they tried doing like a flingy thing when they were in high school, but for the most part, no. Sam ends up traveling around the world as an oceanographer, and he's currently in New Zealand, while Clarissa falls in love with a guy named Nick, who she calls CCG, cute coffee guy, and he's an independent musician who happens to run the coffee shop. And if they follow that, then maybe, Clarissa, and it will be focusing on Clarissa and Nick's daughter, as opposed to Clarissa and Sam having a kid or something like that.
You know what? I'm actually okay that they didn't wind up together. I'm kind of glad that they didn't force that romance and that it was just like a platonic friendship, now that I think about it.
Yeah, they tried. In one of the chapters of the book, Clarissa and Sam traveled all over the world together. They were in Italy, and they were taking classes together, and then Sam had a love for the ocean, and Clarissa didn't follow the same passion as Sam. So while Sam was traveling around the world studying ocean life, Clarissa went back to New York to become a journalist.
Can we just see that show? I just want to see that on camera now, like Sam and Clarissa touring Europe and, like, having adventures.
Yeah, in my opinion, now that I think about it, that book is really underrated. Pretty much nobody talks about that book nowadays. Even when the book was even coming out, nobody really talked about it. So I implore you guys, go check out the book or listen to it on audible.com, where Emily Hart, Melissa's sister, is the one narrating it. Anyway, so I guess we can move on because we've already discussed Clarissa for almost 20 minutes. So let's go on to our next show. So the next show we're going to be talking about is the Ren and Stimpy show.
Oh, cool. I was afraid we were going to move on to Roundhouse, but let's talk about Ren and Stimpy.
We've said everything we need to say about Roundhouse.
Let's just quickly talk about Roundhouse, because I know that it's like a Band-Aid. Let's just rip it out and let's just get it over with.
Roundhouse was, I had one VHS tape with an episode of Roundhouse on it, maybe 2 episodes of Roundhouse, and it was interesting, the fact that it was all done on one soundstage and that you saw all of that and that the scenes were very simple. That was an interesting idea. It was not a good idea. And what's more, the writing was not good on Roundhouse, and I don't personally think that any of the kids were very talented. I went back and watched the few clips I could find on YouTube, and there was nothing compelling about Roundhouse, in my opinion. So that's my take on Roundhouse.
And another show that really, really championed the early 90s aesthetic really hard. So it has that going for it. I have almost no memories of Roundhouse, aside from a few, like, kind of hazy recollections of the guy cruising around in the Lazy Boy on wheels or whatever it was. Other than that, I've blocked it out. I think my mind has tried to protect me from Roundhouse. I remember as a kid, like, thinking it was a lot more, like, edgy and dangerous than it actually was. I guess because they made, like, fart jokes or some sort of, like, something that seemed to offend my 5-year-old sensibilities. I thought it was a really edgy show for that reason, but I don't know how correct that assumption was.
I mean, they did do a lot of, like, more, undercuff jokes. Like, sometimes they do jokes that are, like, immature jokes. Sometimes they even go, they even have an occasional innuendo joke. But for the most part, a lot of the jokes, they're just really, really quick. I think the biggest complaint that I have in Roundhouse, besides the fact that the cast, they don't really gel well together. They feel really separate. It's not like in All That, in which, like, all the cast members, they kind of clicked with each other, and you get this sense of, you know, if you pair maybe, like, 2 or 3 cast members, they kind of work together, and they have their own little quirks, they have their own little advantages. Like, you know that this character does really well with character portrayals. This actor does really well with situations in which it's trying to be funny. This character is the straight one.
Characters have chemistry on All That. I don't know if that's necessarily true of Roundhouse.
Yeah, Roundhouse does not have that at all. Like, there's no characters that stand out amongst anything. Every single character acts. Every single character dances. Every single character sings. Nothing about them makes them stand out particularly.
Yeah, well, that, and like you said, the jokes go by so quickly, it's really hard to appreciate any one thing that any one actor did. So it's not like you develop favorites or favorite bits in Roundhouse, because it just moves so quickly that nothing really sticks. Which, again, is an interesting thing, and that style I remember more than almost any of the jokes. I think I remember maybe one joke from one episode of Roundhouse, and that's all that stuck for me because of how quickly it moved.
What was the joke?
Oh, the joke was a girl was wearing a bra that had 2 balloons on it that inflated, so that if your boobs weren't big enough, you could just have it like be fake boobs for you, and then if they popped, it just had extra balloons in it that would also inflate.
See, that's edgy. That was an unheard of joke.
Yeah. I mean, I was 6 years old watching balloons inflate on someone's chest, so I was very impressed by that. Not nearly. Not at 6, thankfully.
That was Eli's sexual awakening.
I think the fact that the creators just felt really angry that All That took its luster, because I think in the book Slime, they were talking about how, you know, that they were planning on doing like a Roundhouse national tour. They were going to have Roundhouse merchandise. But then when the show got canceled, and then All That aired a year later, pretty much nobody remembered Roundhouse anymore. And then All That pretty much took over. And it became like the definitive sketch comedy show of the 90s.
I can understand the creators of Roundhouse's frustration there.
Yeah, because it aired 2 years before All That.
Yeah, they beat him to the punch.
Yeah, it beat him to the punch really hard. It's like with A Bug's Life, you know how when Toy Story was like a big hit, and then A Bug's Life was like its follow-up, and it was the second movie to air on Pixar, and then you had Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, The Incredibles. It just like beat A Bug's Life to the punch, in which it pretty much has become slightly irrelevant.
Oh, I thought you were going to say that the movie Ants came along and sort of robbed A Bug's Life of its relevance.
Well, that too. There you go. That too.
Ants got buried by Bugs Life. Bugs Life got buried by every other Pixar movie. Yeah, that's accurate. But yeah, let's move on. Let's move on to actually good stuff. Let's talk about Ren and Stimpy really quickly.
It was my favorite. I mean, without question, when I was a kid, it was my favorite of the original SNICK lineup. It expanded my consciousness when I saw. Like, I remember the first time I saw Ren and Stimpy as a kid. It was the episode where they're door-to-door nipple salesmen. And even as a young kid, that registered with me as like, are they allowed to say nipple on TV? Is this okay? By the time it was over, like within a matter of like 1 minute, my mom will tell this story to like my friends and stuff. Apparently, within a minute of watching Ren and Stimpy, I was laughing harder than I had ever laughed in my entire life. And that began a years-long infatuation with that show. I loved Ren and Stimpy as a kid. I think I took for granted as a kid how incredibly bizarre it was, but I ate it up. Until Rocco came along, it was without question my favorite Nickelodeon show.
Ren and Stimpy is probably one of the TV shows that had the greatest impact on me as a child as far as defining my personality. Ren and Stimpy was a show that was stupid and goofy and relentless and pushed the boundaries as far as it possibly knew that it could. It was gross, and all of those things clicked with me in a way that no other show did, and that defined kind of my humor in a strong way moving forward. So that's one of the 2 things that I have to say about the show. The other one is all of that is marred now by what has happened with John Kay being a messed up pervert, which has come to light. It sucks so bad that Ren and Stimpy was such an influential thing for me, and he's such a garbage human.
Who would have ever thought that the guy creating Ren and Stimpy was a sexual deviant? I definitely have not watched Ren and Stimpy since the allegations about John Kay came out. It does taint it for sure.
That will always be like the final note I have to say about that show is like, it sucks.
It's such a shame, too, because, you know, there were talks about, like, a Ren and Stimpy short to air on the third SpongeBob movie, and, you know, if it would have done really, really well, then we could have had, like, a TV movie based off of Ren and Stimpy. But unfortunately, because of that, I don't think we'll ever see Ren and Stimpy have a TV movie, let alone air on Nickelodeon again.
Yeah, it's the Cosby Show of cartoons. If John Kay was smart, he would just sell the rights entirely. He would give up the show for whatever large sum of money they would give him. I mean, he doesn't deserve it, and hopefully they wouldn't give it to him. But if he were smart, he would get rid of it and detach himself from it and take what he can and walk away.
Yeah. To be fair, you know, Bob Kemp has always been, like, the hero of Ren and Stimpy to me anyway.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
All right. Well, I guess we can move on to our next show, which during the midsummer of '94, that was when they changed the schedule. They added 5 shows instead of 4, and the show that they added in was The Adventures of Pete and Pete.
Now, clarify this for me if you don't mind, Patricia. Was Pete and Pete already airing like during the daytime on Nickelodeon, and was it moved to SNICK, or did it premiere on SNICK?
No, it aired in '93, so I take it that it did air like during the day because the show was becoming really popular, or maybe, you know, to draw in more towards an older audience, then maybe they aired it on SNICK.
Yeah. It makes total sense they would move it to SNICK because I do, you know, it obviously kind of appeals to an older, more mature sensibility.
Yeah, I think it fits the SNICK brand. You know, maybe the first thing that they did was said, like, oh, we have this show and we're trying to fill out more hours, put it on during the daytime after school. It's a great fit for that. But then they also said, you know what? It's like the demographic for SNICK too, so let's just do both.
Yeah, and here's the thing, and I don't know about you guys, but I think I did mention this on the Pete and Pete podcast I did almost 5 years ago, but when I was a kid, I didn't appreciate Pete and Pete. I just thought it was, like, really weird. But then when I rewatched it again, when they were doing the Pete and Pete reruns on the N, if anybody even remembers what the N is, then I started appreciating it a lot more. I remember the incredibly quirky yet memorable characters. I remember the silly yet relatable situations that they would go through, and I remember the amazing soundtrack. In high school and college, that was when the series stuck out to me the most.
That really feels like the demographic it was sort of designed for. It's hard to get into Pete and Pete as a kid. I didn't really latch onto it when I was a young kid either, because it's, not to say it's subtle, but it's like quirky and weird. It's not in your face in the way that most of the other live action Nickelodeon shows were. You have to have some level of like intellect, yeah, and like a more developed sense of humor to sort of appreciate what makes it, you know, what makes that show what it is. I could see a lot of indie films from like the 2000s and beyond sort of taking influence from it.
None of the other shows before it relied as heavily on irony as I think Pete and Pete did. Pete and Pete was a show where the jokes were maybe more layered and where the camp involved was more subtle, like consciously more subtle, I think. And so, yeah, the humor becomes more nuanced, which makes it harder for kids to attach to. I remember we just didn't have Nickelodeon during the time that Pete and Pete first started, so I was only watching it sparingly at my grandparents'. And so it didn't click with me in the way that it should have. But once we did get Nickelodeon while Pete and Pete was on the air, I watched it pretty religiously. And I think for the same reason I watched Clarissa, because it was a show that purported to be authentically about kids. And so I remember watching Pete and being like, yeah, this is what a kid's experience is supposed to be like. Like, maybe mine's not exactly like it, but that's my fault. That's not Pete and Pete's fault. And I took Pete and Pete to be a very important show, and I watched it and thought, like, they are speaking to me and I need to listen. And so even the parts that I didn't get, I was like, this is weird, but I guess life is weird, okay.
Just the style of it, the humor, the indie rock soundtrack.
Yeah, I remember when Pete and Pete was celebrating its 20th anniversary, and the creators and the actors didn't know if anybody was going to show up to the reunion. The tickets were sold out within the first 5 minutes.
Wow. That doesn't surprise me, though. There's a lot of, there's still a lot of love for that show, for sure.
I know that Justin McElroy of My Brother and Me is actively trying to get the later seasons of Pete and Pete released on DVD because they never were. I think just the first 2 seasons were released, and he's been tweeting with Danny Tamborelli and the creators of the show to get the later seasons released. And my understanding of it is that the reason they haven't been is strictly because of musical rights that they don't have.
Well, here's the thing. There's one episode in which there's a particular band that they used a lot of their music on. It's the episode in which it's that Little Pete and Nona go over to the dance, and there's the band actually show up as a guest, and they're the ones like performing their songs, and they perform like at least from what I recall, at least almost every single song except for one from a soundtrack that they released at the time. And I think that because of that, they were having like severe legal issues to have the DVDs released. And Will McRobb, he was a guest on the show a few years ago, and he talked about there's rumors that they're sitting in a warehouse somewhere in New Jersey or something. So everything's like all complete. The commentary's all done. The episodes are there. So, and even still to this day, like the DVDs are getting even more and more rarer because the series has been out of print for a long time. I looked up, how much seasons 1 and 2 are on eBay, and my God, they're really expensive.
I'm starting it right here. The Grassroots Campaign released the entirety of Pete and Pete on Blu-ray. The way it was intended to be seen. I bet it would look really good on Blu-ray. I mean, it doesn't look like it was shot on cheap video or anything. But yeah, I'm right there with him. Someone needs to Shout Factory, or someone needs to release the entire series.
If you can't release that particular episode, then do what Chalk Zone did when they had the Baja Men and just remove that episode from the lineup. Cut that episode out and just release the episodes that you can do.
Wait a minute. Were the Baja Men on Chalk Zone?
Yes, they were.
Oh my God. That's the most early 2000s thing I think I've ever heard.
Both of them thought they were hitching their wagons to a star that would never stop. So, I have a question. Pete and Pete, I know, was on SNICK for a time, but it wasn't there for very long, right? Was that the first show to leave?
Yeah, I think so, because after Pete and Pete, then The Secret World of Alex Mack and all that pretty much took it over.
Yeah, and Clarissa left around the same time, I think. 94, 95?
Yeah, around 94, yeah. It left in 94, and then in 95, that was when Mitchell Kriegman was doing the Clarissa Now pilot on CBS. Because, Get this, Nickelodeon thought that Clarissa Explains It All shouldn't have a continuation because Melissa Joan Hart was too old to play as Clarissa, and they needed to find a new it girl for their new shows. So that's why they did Secret World of Alex Mack.
It's a real shame that there wasn't a network out there that aimed at the demographic between like Nickelodeon and MTV. I mean, I guess that's kind of what SNICK was.
That's what ABC's TGIF was.
Oh yeah, I guess so. I just wish there had been a more viable platform for shows aimed at a slightly older audience.
To be fair, that's where Melissa Joan Hart went, was like when Clarissa didn't happen, she just did Sabrina, which was on TGIF.
That's right. And that show is also getting a reboot, by the way.
Yeah. A dark reboot.
Yes, that should be interesting.
I'm excited about that. So Clarissa and Pete both left SNICK around the same time, I guess, and then the next show that was added was All That.
What do we think of All That?
I love Are You Afraid of the Dark, obviously. Are You Afraid of the Dark is like my favorite Nickelodeon show at this point, I think. But was All That the most important show to air on SNICK?
I mean, let's think of it this way. All That, I remember, I mean, if it wasn't Are You Afraid of the Dark that really got a lot of people tuning in, it was definitely All That. Because All That was such a... it was definitely one of the staples of Nickelodeon during the 90s. It led up to so many spin-off series that would eventually lead up to pretty much kickstarting Dan Schneider's career.
Yeah, I would say that All of That was for Nickelodeon's live action. Like, it was what SpongeBob has become for their animation. It was the show that was the backbone of that operation. Like, at this point, SpongeBob is their longest-running cartoon, and it is, like, he's basically their Mickey Mouse. Like, he's their mascot. SpongeBob is the thing for Nickelodeon animation. And I would say that live action-wise, it had to be All That. It was their backbone.
Yeah, it pretty much was. for a very long time, especially. It was the Saturday Night Live for kids. It was the 90s equivalent of You Can't Do That on Television. There were unlike Roundhouse, there were so many characters that we gravitated to. A lot of the actors we already knew from the skits. The skits up in particular were the ones that really stuck out, that were very memorable. And also in the early runs of all that, they had a lot of hip-hop and rap guest stars. And if you ever read the oral history of all that, which they did a few years ago, the creators and producers of all that were talking about how they wanted to introduce rap and hip-hop for a more general audience, and they wanted to showcase different music that wasn't shown anywhere else. So that's why in the early seasons they brought in a lot of rap and hip-hop artists. But then when the later seasons happened, that was when pop music started becoming really popular, and then the music style changed.
Yeah, I remember watching, I think the first time I ever saw, we didn't have MTV, I was very, very young, I was in elementary school, so I definitely know that the first time I saw Missy Elliott performing anything was on All That. Am I crazy? She was on there, right?
Yes, she was. There were a lot of people on All That you would never expect to, see. Like, there were so many hip-hop and rap stars that it was just, like, really crazy to think that they were actually there.
First place I ever saw Usher perform.
Yeah, and he nearly got butt naked. Do you remember that? Usher was like taking his clothes off on Nickelodeon.
Seriously? I don't remember that part.
Go back and watch it. He takes his shirt off and his pants are so low that you can like see his hip bones and stuff. And I was like, holy cow, what is going on here?
Yeah, so you go from like, The Brat and TLC in season 1 all the way up into like NSYNC and Britney Spears and, Bare Naked Ladies around season 7.
Shame on you, All That. Before we move on to Alex Mack, I do want to say that the one thing that needs to be acknowledged about All That, just to prove how much of a cultural zeitgeist it was, is do either of you remember, Patricia, I'm sure you do, but Dykes...
were you aware of the fact that Chris Farley guested on All That?
Yes, he was in the chocolate sketch, right?
Yeah, and he was the ketchup guy.
Yeah, I remember that like it was yesterday.
What a weird, amazing thing.
They had a lot of guest stars on there,
Kenan
right?
Thompson and Chris Farley were in a sketch together.
Yeah, and it's so crazy to think that Chris Farley was on SNL at the time, and who would have thought that, nowadays Kenan is in SNL. If
they reboot All That, Kenan will have to be on it.
Yeah, they do. So Kenan, it's crazy to think that, watching Chris I actually saw the Chris Farley skit recently because I don't remember. I think it was the Nickelodeon Facebook page that shared it, or one of the social media pages.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, they actually did share that, and I think I remember that. I think maybe around that time that Chris Farley was doing the All That skit, that he might have been doing the voice acting for Shrek right before he passed away.
Oh, interesting. I guess that would have been around the same time.
Yeah, so that would have been... I mean, I can't remember exactly. I want to look up now when that sketch happened, because it probably was not that much before his death.
If I remember, it was probably like around maybe 95 or 96. Yeah, I think it was like around that time, because I know Kenan left around season 5 to do Kenan and Kel. And that was when a lot of the cast members started to shift and change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when they started to actually add new people and lose some of the old ones.
How do you think the comedy on all that holds up now?
When I was watching the show a few years ago to do my podcast, I will admit that the first season is very rough. Especially the pilot season, the pilot episode. The pilot episode is very rough, and the first season, it doesn't have the footing. I think in around seasons 2 and 3 is definitely when the show got a lot stronger. There's a lot of skits that I do remember, like Super Dude and, Cooking with Billy, Randy and Mandy, The Island Girls, Good Burger, Okra, Peter and Flem.
I'd forgotten about Okra.
Yeah, Okra, which was Kel's attempt of playing Oprah. Peter and Flem, which is another favorite of mine, where you have like a good kid and a bad kid. The good kid was Kel Mitchell, and the bad kid was Josh Server. It's like one of those like books that you would read in that magazine as a kid that, shows you about the good and the bad.
Yeah, Goofus and Gallant.
Yeah, there you go. That's the one. Rufus and Gallant, yes. So you have an example like, Peter eats his meal slowly and chooses food 25 times. Flem eats a pound of sugar, and you see like Josh just picking up a bag of sugar and just like dumping it all over himself.
I'd forgotten about that, yeah, but it's like a split screen kind of thing.
It was hilarious. And the one skit that I remember that they only did like once, and I think it was like in season 1, was, again, you have Kel and Josh, and they were cereal critics, and then they would just have like a whole bunch of cereal, and they would be trying it, and they'll be describing the cereal like, this cereal is crunchy, but it doesn't have a lot of the texture as this previous cereal, which... Oh my god, this was like a prototype of food tasters on YouTube when they would talk like they buy like weird food on the supermarket and then they would just like eat it and you see their reactions.
It's probably where they got the idea.
Probably, yeah.
Eli, what was your favorite All That sketch as a kid? Not necessarily your favorite now, but which one did you enjoy the most back then?
I think probably the ones that made me laugh the most were what was the one where Kenan was in a bathtub and he was a French guy?
Pierre Escargot.
Yeah. Not vital information. What was it?
Everyday French with Pierre Escargot.
Everyday French with Pierre Escargot. Yeah, that was probably the one that got me to laugh the most. That and we, for some reason in my house, we quoted the one with Miss Penlin where she's making kids eat their peas.
I'm Miss Penlin. I like peas.
Yeah, Kenan was the best part of that show, I think. Kel was good, but Kenan was the best.
Yeah, I agree. Kenan was the best cast member in All That, by far. Not to say anything bad about the rest of them, but Kenan was the one that stood out. He had, I think, like the most characters that were incredibly memorable in the entire All That run. He had Randy from, Cooking with Randy and Mandy. He had Super Dude. He had, Pierre Escargot. He had Les Oaks Construction Worker. He had Mavis from Mavis and Clavis. He was the one who had all these amazing characters, and he acted them so well.
Clearly, he was the one earmarked for stardom.
And he is the one, like of everyone, he's the one who went on.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely the best of them. So after All That was Alex Mack, right?
Alex Mack, yeah.
This was, in my mind, kind of a departure from what I had started to expect from SNICK. This show, I would compare to Are You Afraid of the Dark as the show that took itself the most seriously.
Yeah, it was not an outright comedy, which was a departure. I guess had there been another dramatic show on Nickelodeon up to that point other than Are You Afraid of the Dark?
I mean, not counting, the stuff that they aired on the end, but I guess the closest one that would be, like, really dramatic was Caitlin's Way.
I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, most people have.
I literally don't even remember that. I know that after Alex Mack kind of ushered in a few of those, right? Because they had Shelby Woo.
And Alan Strange.
Which was a little bit more comedic, I would say, but also, yeah, tried to take itself somewhat seriously.
That show is a major whiplash in terms of tonal shifts. It tries to be really serious, but at the same time tries to be really goofy. We'll talk about that in a minute.
Yeah, but I would say that Are You Afraid of the Dark and then Alex Mack were the two serious shows that they had initially, and they followed the Alex Mack format more as they tried to make others moving forward.
Yeah.
Alex Mack was also the first, well, I guess not the first. It was the second show after Are You Afraid of the Dark that I can remember making heavy use of special effects. And I remember as a very young child, I guess I was like 7 by that time, the morphing effect where Alex Mack turned into liquid blew my mind. Like, I remember being, like, stunned that Nickelodeon could pull off such an impressive, like, use CGI in their show.
Yeah. Watching the puddle move around on the floor, I was like, this is incredible.
I was like, this is a landmark achievement for them. And now you watch it, and it looks so, like, obviously terrible and silly.
Yeah. I would say, in my opinion, that if you rewatch Alex Mack again, I mean, there was a lot of things about it that don't hold up. Like, it tries, I mean, if you watch the first 2 seasons, it tries way too hard to be like Clarissa in terms of Alex Mack is going through everyday situations and she feels awkward and uncomfortable about stuff, especially now that she has these powers.
Correct me if I'm remembering this wrong. Was it I don't remember Alex Mack really, really well outside of the visuals. Was it like, like the first Spider-Man movie in that it's using her superpowers as like a metaphor for like going through puberty or getting older?
Something like that, yeah. You see, the whole point of Alex Mack is that, she's going through her first, day of middle school, and she's, basically awkward and uncomfortable, and then she gets hit with the chemicals, and there's this whole conspiracy that's going on in which they live in a small town in which this power plant is the one that's, giving everybody their jobs, and it's basically like their bloodline into work. Everybody in the town works in the power plant in some way, shape, or form, and the person who runs the power plant is pretty much like takes over the entire town because she has so much power. And she's using the chemicals so she can create a weight loss drug, sort of like illegally. It's never been tested. And so when the guy dumps the chemicals accidentally on the kid, they're trying to find the kid, but they don't remember what the kid looked like. And so she has to hide her powers, and she doesn't want them because she's just trying to live a normal life. And she just, is trying to work with having powers, but at the same time going through school life. It isn't until seasons 3 and 4 in which things get really serious. That's when the power plant hires somebody more competent to try to find Alex. And in season 4, they succeeded. They capture, her family, they capture her friends, and then Alex is confronted with Danielle Atron, and she basically tries to, capture her so they can be able to experiment on her, and it gets really, really good as time goes on.
And that's when Alex has to kill someone.
Something like that. And then, of course, we have the ambiguous ending in which they actually do have the serum that is able to cure her powers, and you don't know if she takes it or not. So, I think that Alex Mack starts really rough and trying to be like Clarissa, but the times in which they do focus on the power plant and trying to be a little bit more serious, that's when the show gets really, really good.
Yeah, I specifically remember, and I think that actually contributed a lot to the show's ratings decline as well. Like, it got very, very involved in its actual plot, and I think for casual viewers that made it difficult to follow along. I quit watching it around that time because I wasn't able to watch it frequently, but I would see ads for it. I would see the commercials and think, wow, this show has clearly gotten so good. Like, it's very serious about what's happening now. And I was always upset that I didn't have time to watch it and to keep up with it. But it is interesting that it started off as more of a, like, at the end of every episode, things kind of reset back to normal. She's hidden. She's not going to be found out. No one knows about her powers. And then it evolved into something closer to, like, a Stranger Things.
Yeah, and that's a shame, too. I mean, I think that by the time Alex Mack started getting really, really good, Buffy the Vampire Slayer started airing around that time. And that, I feel, was, like, the perfect example of a teenager going through everyday life in school, and she has to be a hero. That, I felt, was a perfect balance. Powerpuff Girls aired around, like, a year later, and that was also another great balance of, girls who are going to school, and then at the same time, they're heroes and stuff like that. So, better shows utilizing these concepts that Alex Mack attempted to do started coming out, and it got, it was like a lot more groundbreaking. I would say that Alex Mack is a bit of a slow burn, and then when seasons 3 and 4 came along, that's when it started getting good. I always found season 2 to be kind of pointless. So it's basically that you can just skip out on. You don't really have to miss much of anything.
Was Alex Mack the last show on SNICK to... I guess Kenan and Kel might have also, but was Alex Mack maybe the last show to air on SNICK that exclusively launched on SNICK?
I think you're forgetting a little show called Animorphs.
Yeah, Animorphs, that's what I was to say, yeah.
Oh, God. I try so hard to forget Animorphs. But okay, so aside from those, Alex Mack is on SNICK, and then they'll re-air episodes throughout the week occasionally. But Space Cases didn't debut on SNICK, did it?
Oh.
It might have.
I mean, I think maybe it did, but then I remember that Space Cases then, I think maybe Space Cases did maybe air around the afternoon, and then maybe it started airing around SNICK.
I genuinely think that, with the exception of Animorphs, I think that maybe Alan Strange also, maybe the ones actually that sort of follow in the Alex Mack mold are the ones. Yeah, so I think that Alex Mack, Kenan and Kel, Mystery Files of Shelby Woo, Alan Strange, maybe KaBlam, I don't know.
Wikipedia says that Space Cases aired for a time on Nickelodeon's SNICK block of programming, so the way they phrase it makes it sound like it didn't premiere on SNICK, so maybe I'm wrong. KaBlam definitely was not created for SNICK. That was part of the unhealthy trend of moving regular Nicktoons into the SNICK block, which I was never a fan of.
Well, remember, KaBlam originally aired on All That.
Oh, did it?
Yeah, it did. It did air on All That. The first thing that they ever aired was the Action League Now skit. And because the Action League Now skit was so popular, they decided that, KaBlam was going to get its own show.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, I said what I said in error then. I didn't realize it had roots in All That. Yeah.
So basically, if you're a spinoff of All That, which is to say KaBlam and Kenan and Kel, and the Amanda Show, yep, you end up in SNICK. If you're a spiritual successor to Alex Mack, you end up on SNICK. Or if you're Animorphs, which we'll get to. But yeah, around the time that Alex Mack aired, they're moving shows out of the lineup. They're moving Are You Afraid of the Dark out of the lineup for a period of time. Clarissa has ended by this time. I think eventually All That leaves for like a year.
They started airing, they still aired All That until like around 99. And then when the revival happened, that was when they kickstarted All That back again.
Yeah, but during kind of this middle period of the mid 90s, like there were not a whole lot of new shows introduced to SNICK that were SNICK exclusives. I don't think. I know that.
No, this is when they aired the Nicktoons.
Yeah, and then so the next new show to come on after Alex Mack, like they had a period where they showed Doug, they had a period where they showed Rugrats. I feel like Rugrats was on there a couple of times, but the next...
Oh yeah, Rugrats was there. Rugrats was there a lot.
The next new show to air was Kenan and Kel, right?
Yeah, Kenan and Kel was... Well, technically it would be Space Cases.
Let's talk about Space Cases briefly. Let's hit the bullet points of... Let's go through the rest of the 90s very quickly and knock out these shows.
Yeah,
Space Cases only 2 seasons?
Yeah, technically, Space Cases was like 2.5 seasons because the show got canceled.
Yeah, and that was another show that really started to kind of lean into its own lore the further into it that you went.
Yeah, basically Space Cases is like if you took Star Trek and Lost in Space and put it together and have it more kidified. You basically have these troublemaking kids and they go into a space station and then it launches up and they are basically lost and they're trying to find their way back home. And basically you have these ragtag group of kids. You have a kid from Earth, you have a kid from another planet, and, well, actually there's a lot of kids from other planets, but basically you had one kid from Earth, and he's played by Walter Jones, the guy who was the Black Ranger in Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
I did not realize that as a kid. How did I not realize that as a kid? I'm kicking myself now.
Yeah.
This show also had Jewel State, who was on, I believe, 2 episodes of Are You Afraid of the Dark? My dog's going nuts.
Eli's dog is a big Jewel State fan.
Yeah, Jewel State. I think that Catalina was probably like the best character in the show because she was the one who actually did something in the series. She had like these really cool sonic screams and she was able to like help out her friends whenever they, were going through a lot of trouble. There was a little bit of a weirdness to her because she's always talking to like this imaginary friend who in season 2 turned out to be a real person named Susie.
I remember that plot twist, and didn't the imaginary friend sort of replace her on the show as a regular character?
Yes, she did. Because they swapped. Because the Catalina ended up stuck in the same dimension as Susie was, and then Susie pretty much took over the show, took over season 2.
It's so interesting looking at these SNICK shows that are like that are obviously trying to like capture the zeitgeist of like whatever is going on at the moment. And like I remember Space Cases came out at a time when I assume, was Star Trek The Next Generation still on, or had it ended? Had we moved on to, like, Deep Space Nine?
Yeah, Deep Space Nine must have been airing around that time.
Well, no, Firefly would have been after that because I think, wasn't Jewel State also on that? Yeah, so that would have been after.
Yeah, Jewel State was on Firefly, but Firefly was like years later, right?
That would have been after. That was 2000s.
Yeah, that was like 2000. This is 96, so that was like years later.
But this was around the time you had like Babylon 5 and like Farscape and stuff like that.
Yeah, Farscape, and then it would have been like Voyager would have been the newest one at the time.
Yeah. Interesting that Nickelodeon even attempted to like dip their toes into that water. Like, credit to them for trying.
I think budget had to hurt on this one.
Yeah, the budget was really bad. If you guys read interviews and articles about the budget, it's awful. Like, they had to use props from Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Interesting.
Yeah, I recognized the Lights Out game when I was watching the show. I was like, wait a second, that's just a toy that they've glued to the wall.
Yeah, the Lights Out, you know, if you kids who didn't grow up in the 90s know what it is, it's basically like you push a button and it turns off lights, but then there's some lights that are still on, and the whole point of the game is that you're supposed to turn off all the lights.
It's like an LED-powered version of Minesweep, almost, but not quite.
Yeah, something like that. And yeah, the show ran on a very, very low budget. And that was one of the things that was a struggle for the show. It had very low ratings. Pretty much nobody watched it, despite the fact that they really tried to like push this show to be like a hit. And they even had like a lot of celebrity guests at the time. Like they had Bill Mumy, they had Danny Tamborelli and Michelle Trachtenberg. George Takei was the villain of the series.
I'm looking here and it says Mark Hamill was on it.
Oh yeah, he was in it. He was one of the aliens.
I wonder if that's just a hard sell for kids. Like, for all those shows, when I think of like, the various Star Trek knockoffs that came off that were popular in the 90s, I mean, those are all pitched at like adult. I feel cruel saying like adult nerds. It's hard to sell that as a cool idea to kids, like this sort of like Star Trek premise.
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, I was into sci-fi, and I still understood that Star Trek was for nerds. And so when I saw this, I was like, this is Star Trek for kids, which means this is just for nerd kids. And I was like, I'm a nerd kid, so I'll watch it. But I understand what's happening here.
And I wonder if that contributed to its lack of success.
Yeah, and you know what the sad part about it is that it had a lot of potential to be something really, really good. Like, it had a really interesting storyline with Radu, who was from the planet Andromeda, and he was a part of a race that were the evil race that caused a lot of wars, and the kid played by Walter Jones, his father was killed by an Andromedan, and he had a hatred towards Radu, and then they started becoming friends, very similar to like, Kirk and Spock in that kind of sense, and... Yeah. Then you have Radu falling in love with one of the aliens whose father was the main bad guy, and and then eventually season 2 happened, and then they crash landed on a planet, and they're trying to find their way to fixing the ship so that they can be able to find their way back home. And I guess that's when things just kind of like stilted after a while. I guess when you have a case in which like, oh, they're traveling around in space and they're getting to know each other, but now they're stuck in a planet, and it just kind of like the plot kind of just stopped. And I guess that's when people just lost interest. I've always stated in my discussions in various Nickelodeon shows that when it comes to Nickelodeon, let's be honest, their sci-fi shows have not done very well. Space Cases, Journey of Alan Strange, Marvin, and, when they try to reboot the Tomorrow People in the 90s, they didn't turn out very well. I think that Invader Zim is the exception than the rule in terms of Nickelodeon and sci-fi series.
Yeah, and I definitely think that's because animation, the budget for animation is always different, and you can get away with doing more interesting things without animation than you can. You can make an epic sci-fi as a cartoon, and the budget's not going to be that much different than if you make Doug.
I think it's also a hard sell when you have something like Space Cases, but you surround it with like these like really wacky comedic shows like All That and Kenan and Kel.
Yeah, I think I may have said this before, but I know in this day and age in which we're rebooting all the classics, why can't shows like Space Cases that never really had a chance to stand out because of its budget constraints have a chance to come back? Because it had a lot of potential. There's a lot of good things in Space Cases, but I think because that if you look at the actors, some of them are like really wooden and some of them are really over the top. And I think that the character of Bova, he's completely useless. He is like the butt monkey in the show, and he's just awful.
Every show has one.
Yeah, he sucks. So, there's a lot of good things about this show. I just felt like, they just didn't have they didn't have the resources. I felt that maybe if they did, this show would have been amazing, but they were just like restricted with everything.
Shall we move on to a somewhat more successful show in Kenan and Kel?
Yes, please, let's do so.
Talking about Kenan and Kel, I want to say that as much as I praised Kenan Thompson and Kel Mitchell, they were both great on all that. As much as I praise the two of them, as much as I talk about liking stupid humor early on with things like Ren and Stimpy, by the time Kenan and Kel came around, I was 10 or 11 years old, and Kenan and Kel was too stupid for me.
It was a sitcom, and I was like, even as a kid, I felt like anything other than Seinfeld that was presented in sitcom form was kind of like inherently cornball and stupid.
Yeah, by the time it came around, I was interested in watching sitcoms that were being written for adults. Like, I was interested in watching Seinfeld. And by 1997, I was watching Friends, which is a show for adults, but still had Joey and Chandler owning a duck. And to me, that was funny. So to see a sitcom that was written for kids, I felt like it was written for kids younger than me. And maybe it was good for that demographic, but by that point, I don't think I could take comedy seriously that was written for elementary school kids.
My most vivid memory of Kenan and Kel is the episode where, is it Horace Grant from the Bulls? A member of the elite late 90s Bulls team that won 3 championships. He's very successful, but I remember thinking, man, this is the best Chicago Bull you could afford to have guest star on here. You couldn't even get Pippen.
Horace Grant also was, like, he couldn't get on a better show either, is the sad thing. Because they asked the other Bulls first.
Again, he's a phenomenally successful player, but I still kind of pitied him a little bit for that.
Yeah, I guess it could have been, it could have been worse. I mean, you remember My Brother and Me, in which they got Kendall Gill to appear as a guest?
I do not remember that. I remember the show, but I did not remember that happening.
Yeah, that actually did happen. And I think that in one of the episodes, they actually had Dennis Scott. I remember, like, that episode in which, when Kendall Gill was being interviewed, and he's, like, thinking, man, every time that, these people interview me, they always ask me the same questions. Kendall, how did you get into the NBA? And then they're saying, hey, Kendall, how did you get into the NBA? And then the second question was, Kendall, what's your favorite ice cream? And then they said, so, Kendall, what's your favorite ice cream? And he's just looking at him like he's a goof.
Is this on My Brother and Me?
Yeah, that's in My Brother and Me.
Man, I have no memory of that.
Oh, man, that's you know what? I'm just going to say it right now. For everybody who makes fun of, like, Full House, saying, like, oh, man, that show is, like, cornball, humor. I'm serious when I say this. My Brother and Me is awful. It is really, really bad. Like, if you watch it now, the acting is so terrible, and the stories are so cliched and stock, but at the same time, it's hilarious. It is hilariously bad. This is a type of show that I would highly recommend you gather a group of your friends and you watch this, and you will just be laughing about how incredibly stupid it is. It has the same things that you would see in any sitcom in the 90s. It has bad acting, it has stock characters, it has one-liners. It's just awful.
Does it just end up feeling like a parody of the kind of show it was meant to be?
If it was a parody, then that would be great, but I don't think it was supposed to be a parody. I think this was supposed to be a legit show. I think this was supposed to be a show that was, like, very similar to, like, Family Matters and, Welcome Mr. Cooper or Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, in which it was supposed to be, like, one of those African-American sitcoms that everybody liked to tune into. But this show has not held up. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because when you watch Kenan and Kel, Kenan and Kel's humor may be a little bit immature, and it may be relying a lot about, like, slapstick, but you cannot deny about just how incredibly great that the chemistry of Kenan and Kel were. You don't see that a lot nowadays when it comes to comedy. Like, Kenan and Kel just had such great chemistry. Everything that they did together was hilarious, and it brought up so many great moments in the show that people still remember. I think that Kenan was the best in all that, but when it comes to Kenan and Kel was the best one, hands down.
I'm recruiting, I'm bringing in a ringer here to talk about Kenan and Kel really quickly. I was approaching the age when I felt like I was too old for it when it came out. I reached out to my younger siblings on Facebook really quickly and asked them, is Kenan and Kel a well-remembered show among people your age? My brother, who was born in 92, says, it's not remembered well by most people, but then says, I watch it regularly on Amazon.
The fact that your brother still watches that, I want to message him and be like, all right, Alex, we have to talk.
He says it's part of the nostalgic Nick bandwagon that's catching on. So apparently for people born in the 90s, where it was like the first sitcom they ever saw, I guess it holds up for them. I guess there's a bit of a generation gap there.
Yeah, I guess it's very similar to, like, when we were talking about Clarissa, in which, like, 90s, trends are now starting to become, like, nostalgic for younger kids. They're starting to experience it for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, the way you phrase that about it being the first sitcom someone sees, that kind of explains it to me. If this was your introduction to that format, it is that very, very stereotypical sitcom format, but all of the humor is geared towards someone who is younger than 5th grade. And that makes sense. I wondered about it being a part of the cultural zeitgeist, and so I was going to see if it was still being talked about. I searched BuzzFeed for Kenan and Kel, and their last article about it was 2015. So I wonder if we've hit peak Kenan and Kel nostalgia and it's all downhill, or if they're going to ride a second wave.
They've reunited for a couple times in recent years. I don't think they're portraying the characters from Kenan and Kel, though.
They portrayed the characters from Good Burger on The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, but I guess not Kenan and Kel.
Yeah, here's the thing. I think I understand why for some people they don't really see Kenan and Kel as like a great sitcom, in comparison to the others that did come out before or even afterwards. You see, Kenan and Kel are the only characters you really remember.
I remember the blustery, bespectacled dad on that show.
Yeah, that's true. The dad was great because, he hated Kel, and, he's always been, like, the really tough dad. He felt like Carl Winslow from Family Matters or Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince.
Yeah, and I remember Kenan's boss at the store was someone that I remember. Yeah, also an idiot who was just sort of subjected to their whims.
My sister has also weighed in, and she says generally, no, Kenan and Kel is not really well remembered. She says all that has much more of a name.
I think that's fair.
But yeah, all the other characters are pretty much just there. I mean, you have these two nerdy guys that show up occasionally. You have Kenan's on and off girlfriend. You have the mom. You have Kyra, who's Kenan's sister, who has a crush on Kel, whom is completely pointless. She does not even need to be there at all. The only reason why she's there is because she has a crush on Kel, and occasionally she would tattle on, her parents, saying, like, Kenan and Kel are causing trouble. But other than that, she's just a throwaway character. I think a lot of the characters pretty much are. Kenan and Kel just do so well in the show that all the others just don't really matter.
In Kenan and Kel's defense, Eli and I have quoted the closing, gag, the recurring gag on that show repeatedly, either in life or on our podcast. The Kel, go get me this, and meet me somewhere crazy. And then he says, "Oh, here it goes." That line, that exchange has found its way into our lives a lot more than I would have expected it to as a kid. That is an eminently quotable bit of dialogue.
I would say the phrase "Oh, here it goes" and the phrase "Who loves orange soda" are probably the two things that has contributed to culture for people of our generation.
Yeah. Then there's also, I dropped the screw in the tuna.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's all coming back now. And the Coolio song at the beginning was great.
There were some things happening there, so that's good. I'm trying to find... I'm now really curious and trying to find out if it first aired on SNICK, and I cannot find whether or not it started on SNICK or did not, because I'm wondering how many of the shows did.
Let's continue on our trip through the 90s really quickly and talk about a show that I don't remember at all, and I'm pretty sure I never watched. The Mystery Files of Shelby Woo.
It was a police procedural, just like they tried to do a sitcom with Kenan and Kel. Shelby Woo was a police procedural detective story, and, I don't even think we need to talk about it that much.
You guys are going to have to fill me in on this one. Was Shelby Woo anything to write home about?
It just wasn't that good.
It's not very good. It hasn't held up very well at all. The only characters you remember are Shelby and the grandfather, but he's Pat Morita. Of course you would remember him.
The idea of a Nickelodeon police procedural sounds like the most ill-conceived idea I could think of.
Yeah, basically the whole point of the show is that she is an intern and she works in the police station and she wants to help solve cases, but they don't believe her. They don't really think that she can do it, and so she's just there to, like, clean up the place. And then there's a whole bunch of crimes that are going on and nobody can solve it, and it's up to Shelby to kind of, like, save the day. I mean, the only mystery that I did remember her solving was there was this kid and, he was committing, like, some sort of, like, robbery or some crime or something, and then there was, like, a clue about, look at the calendar, look at the last few months of the calendar, and you'll be able to find out who it is. And so the clues led up to her looking through the calendar of July, August, September, October, November, and it spelled out Jason, and the guy who did commit the crime was a guy named Jason. That's the only one I remember.
That is very corny, and yet surprisingly memorable. I'll never not be able to think of that now.
Yeah, they did try to change it around season 3 by moving it to Boston and then introducing new characters, but that still didn't work. Like, those characters suck just as much. Nothing about that show really sticks out to me. I don't really recommend you guys checking it out. I mean, it hasn't really held up very well.
I don't know, Eli. Do we dare tackle it for a future iteration of our show?
Here it goes. Meet me with a lot of, like, coffee and a surrogate to watch the show for me when I call in sick, and the DVD box set of Shelby Woo.
Oh, here it goes.
So after Shelby Woo was... Do we want to cover KaBlam? It wasn't technically a SNICK show, even though it showed up on it.
I mean, I guess we should. It's technically the only Nicktoon that technically is part of the SNICK lineup that isn't a rerun.
Oh, they aired new episodes on SNICK. Okay.
Yes, they did.
I liked KaBlam as a kid. I liked the not anthology. What's the word I'm thinking of? Where it's like a series of different
Variety show.
Variety show. Thank you. I liked the variety show format of it.
Yeah, I did too. I liked a lot of the different stuff that was on it. I liked Prometheus and Bob. I liked Life with Loopy. I liked the art style on Henry and June as characters because it felt. I went to art school and we talked a lot about being able to see the hand of the artist, like art that is not perfect where you can tell how it was made, and I liked that about Henry and June quite a lot. None of the shows I thought were particularly funny, and none of the animation was particularly good, but when I look back on things like Life with Loopy, I think that the style of it was very, very cool, and all of them had such a distinct, unique style as to be immediately recognizable, and I think that was part of the strength of the show.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't really add much to that. I agree.
Yeah, I think that, in my opinion, KaBlam is really underrated. A lot of people don't really talk about KaBlam as much. They never talk about it in, like, the definitive Nicktoons of the 90s. They always just, like, push it to the side, which is a shame, really, because there's so much variety in KaBlam. There's a lot of charm to it that you can't really replicate anymore. A show like KaBlam cannot exist anymore because, you can easily do something like this on YouTube or something, where you have, like, a few shorts for a few minutes, and then you watch it, and then you just move on to something else.
I'm glad Nickelodeon took a chance. I mean, I guess there were a few different shows like that around the turn of the millennium, but, like, I'm glad they did that.
Yeah, they did cartoons, and they did random cartoons.
Yeah. Yeah, and of all of those, I think that KaBlam was the best.
An interesting thing to note, they tried to do various spin-offs of KaBlam that never really went anywhere. There was a pilot called The Henry and June Show.
I remember that. I remember seeing that, even though it only aired, like, once.
Yeah, it only aired once back in 1999, and then it never aired again.
I'll tell you the only reason I do remember it is because it had The Undertaker and Stone Cold Steve Austin in it. And that was near the beginning of my wrestling fandom, so I marked out for that.
Yeah, there were, I mean, the first half is definitely better than the second half. The first half is basically them, they're going to be starring in their own TV show, and they're going to have all these guests, and things just go horribly wrong.
I can tell because it only aired once. Art imitated life.
It really did go horribly wrong.
Yeah, basically, they were gonna have featured guests like the Olsen twins and Emerald Lagasse and stuff like that. And then the second half, it was just them going to school, and there was this fan who was like really obsessed with them and who wanted to sit next to them and be their friend, and they just try to ignore him. That is not as good. I think that what made the strength of KaBlam was that Henry and June were there for a few minutes. They would crack a bunch of jokes. They had this really nice chemistry, and then you just move on to another cartoon. I think that having a shorter aspect is what made it great. For them having a 24-minute TV series of them, I think there's a reason why it didn't go anywhere.
Well, neither of them are likable characters. You can't stay with characters that aren't likable for very long. June is not it's slapstick humor and it can be funny, but you can't have a character that is that malicious all the time and it work.
Yeah. And also, I think I even did mention this a long time ago that they were going to make a Prometheus and Bob movie.
Yeah, I've read about that quite a bit.
Talk about stretching things out longer than they need to go. I can't imagine how that would have played out.
Well, here's what would have happened, because I actually spoke to the guy who wrote the script. So they were going to have it live action. Chris Farley and David Spade would have played Prometheus and Bob.
Get out of here!
No, I'm not joking.
Yeah, there's no way that would have been sustainable.
That is crazy.
And it would have been it would have been like a prequel movie. It would have taken place when Prometheus and Bob were meeting for the very first time.
That is the best bit of trivia about that show. We can't, nothing I'm going to say is going to top that.
Yeah, nobody knows about this. I mean, I found this out many years ago when reading an article on Variety discussing about that they were going to do a Prometheus and Bob movie. Then when I had Will McRobb on the show, I was like, I'd like to know more about this movie. And then he told me about this, and I was like, you got to be kidding me. And he's like, no, we were planning on doing this, but it never happened. I'm like,
that's insane.
That is crazy. That's insane.
All right.
Let's just go take us through the end of the 90s, and we'll call it a night.
Yeah, because there's not really much to discuss about.
Fortunately, it's all downhill after that, right?
Yeah, right.
KaBlam is the last really great show. They added Rugrats when they did the reboot of it. I didn't like the reboot of Rugrats because I thought Klasky Suppo's artwork became a little bit more of itself, which I've never been a huge fan of.
Which is to say uglier.
Yeah, which is to say ugly. But the next big show was The Journey of Alan Strange, which lasted for one season. At least on SNICK.
No, it lasted for.
Okay, I seem to remember it being on for a little while.
But it was only one season on SNICK, yeah.
Yeah, I want to bring out one thing about Alan Strange. So, this was Thomas W. Lynch's second show after he was finished with Alex Mack. And if you read this there was a newspaper article that I read a few years ago about the creation of Alan Strange, about how he wanted to do this show because he felt like he was the awkward kid in his family. He had a lot of brothers and sisters. He always felt like he was an outcast, and he was alone. He wanted to base Alan Strange on those early childhood thoughts about being alone and surrounded by people that didn't understand him. When you watch the show, wow, you do not expect that at all, because this show has awful tonal shifts. It tries to be goofy and it tries to be serious at the same time, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, I remember some of the awkward attempts at humor the few times I tried to watch it.
It never figures itself out. I wanted to like it because I love shows about aliens, but I could not get into it, and I tried really hard to get into it and never could, and it just didn't work.
Okay, let me punch you out two different episodes that I do remember of. So you have Robbie, who is the girl of the group, and she's supposed to be the motherly character because the family's divorced. The father's this bumbling moron, and you have the little brother who's kind of a smart kid. So one episode you have the mother visiting, and she's begging her mom to stick around, and she kind of just leaves, and she's just really struggling and upset that she's just trying her very best to keep the family together, and Alan's talking about how much he misses his mom and how much he wants to go back to his planet. But then you have another episode in which it's like a parent-teacher night, and the mannequin father kind of like acts out, and it's like really weird, and it's just awkward. And then you have like these weird CGI effects in which like, you know, the eyes kind of like bug out, and you know, he's like eating the canned string cheese. It's wow, it's really awkward. I mean awkward. It's really awkward.
Yeah. By the time Alan Strange came out, I was old enough to know the difference between good special effects and bad special effects.
And good acting and bad acting.
And good acting and bad acting. And Alan Strange did not impress in either of those respects.
Yeah.
It's a perfect segue when we're talking about bad special effects and bad acting into the last original live-action show on SNICK.
Let's talk about Animorphs.
Oh, God.
As we possibly can.
This show is awful. If you were a huge fan of the books in the 90s, then this show is an insult. Now, here's the thing. Nickelodeon very rarely does book-to-TV show adaptations, and you can see why. Because this show not only goes far away from the book, but the acting is terrible, the CGI effects are even worse, and also, I'm sure some of you guys already know, but they didn't show a lot of the episodes of Season 2, and they only showed it exclusively in Canada.
That somehow feels like the most perfect coda to the show I can think of.
I never watched Animorphs. It looked terrible. The fact that it did not air in the United States confirms, like, it's really nice to think about Animorphs as a show now and be like, even as a child, I was right. Damn it. I knew what I was talking about. To me, the Animorphs show was, it was trying to capitalize on the popularity of, you know, another book-to-TV thing, which was Goosebumps. I was like, oh, Goosebumps was a successful book series that became a TV series, so they're trying to do that. And I hated the book series, Animorphs. Like, I never got into it as a kid. I was like, this is stupid. So when the show came out and failed, I was like, this proves that it's stupid. Goosebumps rules, Animorphs rules. That was my take on it then, and that is my take on it now, is that they were trying to make a show based on the books because that worked for Goosebumps, and Goosebumps did it right because it's awesome, and Animorphs failed because it sucks. That is it.
On that note, should we call it a night?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just gonna quickly discuss about what happened. So, around like, you know, around like 1999 throughout 2000, that was when I felt like SNICK had pretty much just petered out. They tried a lot of things to like spicing up, you know, SNICK, because that was when All That and Are You Afraid of the Dark ended their run, and then they tried airing like the Amanda Show, they tried No One Knows Best, and they tried reruns of All That. But it didn't really, like, stick out. And then when the revival happened, you know, that was when, you know, the Brothers Garcia and Taina and the Nick Cannon Show, that was when the new season, revival, All That happened, seasons 7 through 10. But then the one thing that really killed it for me was the SNICK On Air Dare. That stuff was terrible. It was like they were trying to be like Fear Factor, in which like they're gonna throw a bunch of gross things. Like, I remember one in which like they were sticking like they had to bob for apples in a toilet, and they had to like eat a like blue cheese, and they had to do like these really, really stupid things that just made it was so disgusting, just for the sake of disgusting's sake. It was just really awful. It just felt like they were desperate to get ratings, and it just pretty much just crashed, and then SNICK was pretty much over around 2004.
Yeah, I'd already checked out by late 1999 when they did the revival stuff. Like, I was already out of it, probably because of Animorphs. I was like, nope, I'll see you guys later. And I don't think there are any of the shows, you know, I remember seeing maybe a couple episodes of not a couple, I saw a few episodes of the Rugrats reboot thing that they did. I saw a couple episodes of the new All That because my little siblings were watching it, but just none of the other shows had any appeal whatsoever. They all looked terrible to me, and I didn't watch any of them. And
I mean, I'm really glad that, you know, SNICK did the SNICK on, you know, the SNICK on the 90s or All That back in 2013 when they celebrated its anniversary. And they also did the Nick Splat one as well. So I'm glad that Nickelodeon is still keeping the SNICK legacy. It just goes to show you that even after all these years, SNICK is still relevant to the minds of people who grew up with it.
Yeah, I definitely think that the original stuff had a huge impact. You know, even if it dragged itself out too long, I think that the impact of those original shows is unquestionable. And, I think it's really easy to see where the line is, right? Like, anything after all that, it's kind of downhill, in my opinion. None of the shows after all that are as good as the ones that came before them.
Well, none of the shows after all that feel like they're really trying to, like, challenge you and make you... They don't feel more mature. Like, that was the thing about Clarissa, and especially Are You Afraid of the Dark, was that it felt like they were being made for a slightly more mature audience, whereas everything past a certain point felt like it was dumbed down to, like, a younger audience. Like, at this point, like, they're just assuming everyone is all kids, no matter how old they are staying up until 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, so just pander to them.
Yeah. And I think that something like SNICK could happen. I mean, we saw with the 90s or all that in Nick Splat that people still watch it. And, in recently, you had the likes of Mystery Science Theater coming back and, Monster Vision with Joe Bob.
Are they bringing back Monster Vision?
Yeah, well, not necessarily. I mean, they had Joe Bob. They had this 24-hour marathon over in Shudder where Joe Bob was, like, watching a whole bunch of movies and he was giving his ratings. And it turned out to be so popular that they're now doing it again in a couple of months. So, yeah, in a sense, they are doing Monster Vision again. So you know what? If stuff like this can happen, then who knows? Maybe sometime in the line, maybe SNICK will come back. Who knows?
Nick is definitely trying to do revival stuff, so I'll be really excited if they can make a successful revival of the feel of SNICK, where they've got that sort of that attitude and that ambition that the original SNICK had. I would love to see them be able to do a revamp of it, because the early run of SNICK was hugely influential and really good. And, nothing has compared to it since then, I would say.
I think we can wrap things up. Yeah, so guys, thank you so much for coming on by. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having us, Patricia.
Thank you, Patricia. It's always good to talk to you.
All right, so I know that you guys have just finished wrapping up You Scared of This, but please plug and promote your stuff.
Well, if you want to hear us talk about Are You Afraid of the Dark, which we kind of glossed over here, you can listen to us review every single episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark on our podcast, which is called You Scared of This. It is available on Apple Podcast and Google Play, or you can find it at soundcloud.com/YouScaredOfThis.
We spent 2.5 years watching every episode and talking about them at length. We interviewed DJ McHale, and actually, if you're really interested in Are You Afraid of the Dark, we even broke some news on that one, is my understanding, which is pretty cool. We interview Jose Prendas, who wrote the book on Are You Afraid of the Dark. We talked to another horror author. There's a lot of cool stuff that happens, so definitely check it out now that it's all wrapped up. And feel free to find us on our Facebook page, facebook.com/YouScaredOfThis, and tell us what you think of it.
And I would love to have you guys back again if if the Are You Afraid of the Dark movie comes out. I'd love to have you guys back again so we can talk about it.
We will definitely love that.
Well, we will be very busy next October when it comes out, so we'll have a lot to say about it.
All right. Well, that sounds great. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for listening. Let us know in the comments below about when did you first get introduced to SNICK? What were your favorite shows that aired around that time? What were your least favorite? Which era of SNICK did you grow up with? And do you think that it could be possible for SNICK to come back? Thank you so much. Hope to see you around soon, and take care.
Bye.
Time flies when you snick. That's all for tonight. But Nick snicks again next week. It'll be snickerific, snicktastic, snicktacular. It'll be snick. So make sure you're here every Saturday night when your clock strikes snick. Snick.